welcome to the Albuquerque Journal podcast network. I'm Sean Reider. I'm a Journal staff writer, and I primarily cover college football in the state of New Mexico. Today, I'm joined in the studio by Rick Wright, veteran Journal columnist and former UNM football beat writer. Rick, how you doing today?
Doing well, Sean. How about you?
Can't complain.
Good to be here.
And obviously, as you know, it's been a very busy couple weeks for college football in the state of New Mexico. Bronco Mendenhall is UNM's next head coach, was just named last week. New Mexico State is playing their first ever New Mexico Bowl. Just want to touch on some things with you, if that's all good with you.
Let's go. Sounds good.
All right. Well, before we talk about Bronco Mendenhall, obviously, we need to talk about former head coach Danny Gonzalez and his dismissal on November 25th. I've only covered the program for a year. Danny's last year, obviously, but you covered the first couple years. I was just curious from your purview, I mean, what did you feel went wrong in the Danny Gonzalez era?
Well, it's, you can start with the obvious that he'd never been a head coach before. And no matter how long you'd been an assistant and no matter who you'd been an assistant for, being the head guy is a new world. Rocky Long went through that, certainly. He came out the other side and had some great years. And who knows, Danny might have done that as well if he'd been able to keep the job. But I can't fault Eddie Nunez for making the decision he made just based on what had gone on in Danny's 4 years.
I want to go back to a column you wrote after the season-ending loss to Utah State. Where you said the ball was essentially in Eddie Nunez's court in terms of making this decision. At that time, how did you feel about what the decision could be as you were leaving the press box that night?
Well, that was the interesting part. Game columns are kind of stressful sometimes. That one was teed up for me. I knew what I was going to do regardless of how the game turned out. I guess the question was if the Utah State quarterback, I don't remember his name now,
Levi Williams.
Yeah, if he doesn't pick up that fumbled snap, the Lobos tackle him and they win the game. Does that change anything for Eddie? My guess is no. Because as an AD, he has to look at the big picture, not a sliver like one game. But, if the Lobos had won that game, my column certainly would have been different and maybe a little more hopeful from Danny's standpoint. But they didn't win. They finished 4-8. 4-8 wasn't going to cut it based on what had happened the previous 3 years. I listed a lot of reasons why he probably had to go, and a few of the reasons that he should stay, primarily being that he's Danny, native son. Everybody wanted him to succeed, but it wasn't happening. So that's where I came down on that. And the next day, Eddie took my advice, and made the decision. So here we are.
Going into the season, I agree with you. I thought 3-9 was not going to cut it. I thought 5-7 was enough for a fifth year, maybe an extension that he can kind of recruit on that sense because you don't want a lame duck coach recruiting. But 4-8 was kind of a gray area. And when you look at the full body of work, what kind of stood out to you as kind of the red flags as why maybe things shouldn't keep going?
Well, just that there was no turnaround. He fired Derek Wareheim in midseason the previous year. Hoping things would get better. They got worse, and there was just never a point where you could even. The Fresno State game, game 11 the season, fourth win, huge upset against a team that had been nationally ranked. You think, okay, maybe they beat Utah State, go 5-7, one way from Danny's bowl guarantee. Maybe Eddie can see a way to keep him on. And again, he would have to extend him in some way, shape, or form. But you can't just leave him out there for year 5 and expect opposing recruiters not to say to kids, hey, this guy's going to be gone. You don't want to go there. So, Eddie looked at the big picture as he is paid to do and made his decision. Can't argue with it.
And one interesting point to me was after Danny was dismissed, he went on J.J. Buck and Jeff Symbiota's show, The Opening Drive on, I believe, 610 AM, 95.9 FM. Mm-hmm. And one of the thing that stood out to me and a ton of other people was, I mean, he talked about we probably should have embraced the transfer portal a year earlier. We really should have done that because it ended up working well for them in a lot of ways. Obviously, they got, the likes of Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who's absolutely electric this last season. Guys like Caleb Medford, Jeremiah Hickson, Tito Stafford, key contributors and the like. What did you kind of make of that? Did you ever feel, even before this season, that maybe they should adjust in different ways or change the model to be more portal-based?
That had not occurred to me. I mean, and I wasn't as close to the situation as Steve Virgin, your predecessor on the beat, and you. So that had not occurred to me. All I really saw was what was on the field. And I give Danny all the credit in the world for being willing to say that on the radio, that here's a mistake I made. He didn't have to do that, and he did. So that had not occurred to me, but in hindsight, yeah, that's very much the case, and he paid for it, sadly.
Yeah, and I think about, the night he was dismissed, I was in the New Mexico State press box of all places, and I'm frantically looking at my phone, and I checked Twitter, and I think you tweeted it that night, a quote tweet of Danny Gonzalez has been dismissed, and you said, I think, word for word, a shame it didn't work out. And that's kind of the general feeling I get in this sense, because, when Eddie talks about it was the right hire at the time, I think everybody agreed with him that it was the right hire. And obviously now we've moved on to apparently the even righter hire with the return of Bronco Mendenhall, 135-81 career record over 17 seasons at BYU and Virginia, bowl eligible in 16 to 17 seasons. Although I think it's just 5 wins in 2020, and then they didn't go to one in 2021 because of COVID. Going into the search, in general, who did you think were kind of the ideal candidates that UNM should be looking at?
When Bronco's name first came up, that's great. That would be a great hire. I was surprised when Rocky Long's name came up, and B, when it turned out he was really interested, because when he walked away from San Diego State, it was because his stated reason was he still loved coaching, but he was not in love with being a head coach anymore. He didn't like all the responsibilities off the field that a head coach has to deal with: media, fundraising, Kiwanis Club breakfast, so on and so forth. And so I was surprised when it turned out, A, he was connected to the job, B, he was really interested. So that surprised me. To tell the truth, Matt Wells probably would have been my favorite candidate because of his personality. In this day and age, I saw him as the guy who could really get with kids, talk with portal kids to come, talk with potential portal kids to stay, just recruiting in general, junior colleges, preps. I really thought he would have been a great guy for the job, and Eddie Nunez said that. He was very positive about Matt's credentials, but Bronco Mendenhall's credentials just blew everybody away, and the hire has just gotten tremendous reviews all over the place. And so, what can you say? They got their guy.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a really interesting search of a lot of different names in some ways. Like you, I didn't think that Rocky was really under consideration after what Eddie said in his press conference after Danny had been dismissed. He kind of tempered that in some ways. So I was also shocked when he found out that that he did interview. But I mean, there were interesting candidates. Gary Patterson was linked for a little bit.
Yeah, I wasn't thrilled about that just from a media prism, because Gary Patterson can be cranky, and he wasn't the guy I'd want to deal with or would want you to have to deal with. But he's a heck of a coach. There's no question about that. He had tremendous success at TCU. So
yeah, and then even some of the FCS names. I mean, Jason Eck, who has kind of brought Idaho back from the dead. Really, really fun offenses. Entz at North Dakota State, and then Vigin at Montana State. I thought those were all good candidates. But obviously, Pete Thamel came out. He had the report that, UNM was targeting Bronco Mendenhall. And I know he had been linked to the Boise State job beforehand. But I guess for you, now that he's here and now that he's the head coach, what do you kind of remember about him when he was the defensive coordinator from, I believe, 1998 to 2002 under Rocky Long?
Right. I didn't talk to Bronco a lot in those days. I actually, when I did, he was always, he takes kind of a scholarly approach, and we saw that in his news conference to some extent. And I always got the impression then, and also when the Mountain West used to have their weekly teleconference, and BYU was in the Mountain West still, and Bronco was the coach. He was always very cooperative, would answer your questions. Always got the impression he would prefer to be doing something else. And even at the news conference, he said 2 or 3 times, "I'd really like to get this over with so I can go to work." Even though he was excellent in the news conference, as I wrote later on, they all win the news conference. But yeah, he was scholarly, gentlemanly. But I also knew from other people's reporting more than anything else, just the relationships he'd forged with his players on the defensive side of the ball was just special. Special is such an overused word, but it really was. I mean, we heard that last week from former players, how special he was to them, and how much he meant to them, and how much it tore them up when he left, and how much it tore him up when he left. So it starts with that. I mean, X's and O's, yes, he has that. We know that. But it starts with his relationship with players. And, I think that's something that Eddie Nunez saw and realized and reacted to.
Yeah, and I didn't know what to expect out of his introductory press conference. I had never really heard him speak, and, going into it, I listened to one old Virginia press conference, just kind of run of the mill. I think they're playing like Miami that week or something, just to like get the cadence for his voice and all that. But didn't know what to expect because he came out for the UC Santa Barbara game. He's introduced to the pit crowd. And unlike a lot of coaches, I mean, he just walked out there, raised his fist, waved, and walked out. Didn't say a word, didn't do a rah-rah speech or anything. But yeah, I mean, like you said, and I love the column that you wrote, I mean, he won the press conference, but they all win the press conference. When you talk about, some of the answers that he gave in some ways about how he wants to build a team, how he wants to approach the portal, how he wants to approach NIL, which I know a lot of fans have really zeroed in on and kind of keyed on in particular. I mean, what stood out to you the most in terms of the actual answers he gave?
Actually, his response to the question about offense, what scheme he wanted to run, and he said, but I'm paraphrasing, I don't want to run any particular scheme. I want to run something that game to game, week to week, people can't prepare for. And that was really illuminating to me because his style of defense at UNM and Rocky's style of defense was exactly that. Yes, it was a 3-3-5, but game to game, even play to play, you didn't know what was coming. That was the idea. Try and find our tendencies, but you won't be able to. So to hear him talk about offense the same way was really, really interesting.
Yeah, that stood out a ton to me too, and I was really, really impressed with that answer as well. I know a lot of people were, as I mentioned before, impressed with some of his comments about NIL and how he wants to build the program. And on the note of trying to get the program, in terms of how he can get this thing flipped and get it back to a winning program again, I mean, what do you think are kind of the major steps that need to be taken in that regard?
He needs.
Loaded question.
Yeah. He needs to. I hate to say this because it's. I just don't mean it in a negative way. He needs to not be Danny Gonzalez. He needs to not make that early mistake that Danny made with the portal. Of course, nobody's going to make that mistake now because the portal, NIL, they are real. I mean, as I said before, I actually thought Matt Wells was the guy with the personality to really make it all work. But I've never seen that side of Bronco. I've only seen him from the media side. And but I knew then and I know now that his history with players, his relationship to players, is what really separates him. And why wouldn't that work in the recruiting world, even as different as it is now than it was back in 1998, 99, 2001, 02. And obviously he recruited well at BYU. He turned the program around at Virginia. He didn't make them a national power, but he took a program that was really struggling. BYU was struggling when he took over. He made them. In fact, he got them in the national rankings a couple of times, which hadn't happened in a long time at Virginia. So he knows how to do it, and he is who he is. He's a different guy, sort of a guy from most college coaches don't surf. Most of them probably don't aren't horseback riders. Most of them don't name their sons Cutter and Breaker and Raider. But he's different, but he makes those differences work for him with the players and in building a program. That's history. That's what the history is.
And I think, everybody, people love to focus on player retention now. Retention is everybody's favorite word in particular because when you say retention, you're really talking about NIL in some ways. And I agree it's really important. But, I'm kind of building off what you said. I mean, relationships are probably way more important than in the terms of player retention and all that. And it feels like in talking to some of the players that they were not awestruck by Bronco when he first met the team and the like, but they were impressed. I mean, Sire Riley told me, he's like, look, the guy's a winner. Bill said, Ja'Cory Cross-Kemerit, excuse me. He said, hey, he's a winner. Devin Dampier, he's a winner. And and I feel like, they've kind of already figured out a way to trust him earlier. And you're kind of seeing that too with, Tavian Combs, who entered the portal. He's out of the portal, and that's another key addition for UNM.
A great get. That's great, yeah.
And that's really good. I mean, that's a valuable experience and a guy that we'll see what they do defensively in the scheme, but I imagine Tavian's going to be able to find a place to play on that field. But in terms of what the program needs right now, they've been targeting a ton of defensive players, and that makes sense. It was one of the worst defensive teams in the country, pretty much the bottom of the Mountain West, them in Hawaii, and I think Nevada was just down there too. But they've also lost 7 offensive linemen. They're going to, I know they lost all 5 primary starters, which I believe was 3,446 combined snaps among them, which is a lot of experience to lose. I mean, do you feel that, they can overcome those hurdles in some ways and add through the portal enough to kind of come out and have maybe, a season next year where they are in contention for a bowl?
I did see that going into this season, that after the Bryant Vincent hire on offense, that the offense was, and some of the kids they brought in, some of the kids that were coming back, that the offense would be greatly improved. But I was also concerned that the defense would be the opposite, because there's a lot of personnel changes, and Danny was going to have to teach a complicated defense to a lot of guys who hadn't played it before, and that's not all that went on, but I think that certainly went on, and it was just a shame, like I said before, that he couldn't get the two sides of the ball in operation at the same time, and that'll be a problem for Bronco too. His defense has not been the Rocky Long Classic 3-3-5, but again, I expect him to react to the situation. He'll watch film from last year. He'll have all spring to evaluate. And okay, here's what we're going to do on defense that will be easier for all these new people and the returning people too to pick up and be effective. And I expect the defense to be much improved. The offense is going to be interesting with Vincent gone. And we'll see who. We still don't know who's coming back, but if Corey comes back, Bill comes back, and if Devon Dampier will stay, that's a big time head start right there. And if he can repopulate the offensive line, which is a major concern now, if he can do that, and I think the offense could perhaps pick up where it left off, and the defense can be greatly improved. Maybe not top 50, but greatly improved, and give themselves a chance to maybe get those 6 wins that Danny tried to get and didn't.
Yeah, and for those listening at home, I mean, to talk about the defense, they're not at the bottom of total yards allowed or points per game and allowed and stuff like that, or rushing yards allowed. They're not at the bottom of the country, but they were the worst in the country at getting a stop per percentage. I think it was 41.7 was what they finished at. That was 133 out of 133. So there should just be some improvement out of just maybe getting a little bit of better breaks the year after. But On that note, too, I mean, without a full roster right now, without a finalized coaching staff, it's literally just Bronco listed on the website right now, although there's been plenty of rumors and reports. What do you think are fair expectations for 2024?
Well, the interesting thing about the press conference, Bronco made it sound like he already had his staff in place. He said, "Oh, they're in their cars right now." This paraphrasing, and right now we don't have anybody officially hired. There are names out there, but no one's official, and he'll probably wait until he's got his whole, knowing him, and he'll probably gonna wait until the whole staff is assembled before he puts anything out. But no, I think, based on who he is, his history, who he's able to persuade to come back, and I think he's very persuasive once people get to know him. As you said, I think if Matt Wells had been the guy a week ago, you had a lot of players saying, yeah, this guy is great, I'm going to stay. Bronco is, I think it takes a while, but just his history strongly suggests that he is a player's coach, and a lot of these kids are going to stay. A couple of the portal kids have already decided to come back. We know it's often the assistants that do the recruiting, and the head coach is the closer. He'll assemble an outstanding staff, the staff that recruits well. He'll be an effective closer, and I think 6 wins is certainly a possibility.
Well, on the note of bowl eligibility, let's talk about 2 teams that did reach bowl eligibility and will be playing in the New Mexico Bowl this weekend. New Mexico State is playing in their first ever New Mexico Bowl. They're 10-4. Been kind of a dream season in a lot of ways, obviously headlined by the fact that they played in a Conference USA championship game and stomped Auburn 31-10, I believe, in late November. And then Fresno State, 8-4. Really strong start. To me, midway through the season, I thought they were probably the best G5 team in the country. And then they just kind of collapsed. And one of the losses, as you mentioned earlier, was kind of that big upset win for New Mexico. In terms of just New Mexico State and the fact that they're in town and they're playing their first ever New Mexico Bowl, can you just talk from your perspective about the job Jerry Kill's kind of done there over the last 2 years?
Well, I don't know how he's done it, and I've just been thinking that if there's a casino in Vegas that needs a magic act, they should probably hire Jerry Kill. I mean, I just don't know how. Obviously, he knows he's a very effective head coach. He assembled a terrific staff. They recruited extremely well. And, I keep coming back to Diego Pavia. They offered him a scholarship. New Mexico didn't. And not that anything's that simple, but you look at the history and who knows what might have happened if Danny had offered Pavia a scholarship and not asked him to walk on. And it's just been, I don't think even Jerry Kell knew how good Diego was going to be at this level. Obviously, he was terrific in junior college, led New Mexico military to a national championship, but sometimes that doesn't translate, and that's obviously what UNM thought, that he was iffy at best at this level. Jerry Kill said, yeah, why not? Why wouldn't we do that? And they did, and what a difference it's made.
And I don't think I've ever talked to you about this in particular, but I mean, it's late 2021. Kill just finished up his interim stint after Patterson was dismissed at TCU, and then he comes out a couple weeks later and he's New Mexico State's head coach. I mean, what were your thoughts at the time? Just kind of viewing that hire.
Well, I know he and Mario Mocha had a connection. They knew each other, and I was wondering. I mean, Jerry Kill's had some health problems, which have troubled him at Minnesota, and I didn't immediately think, wow, that's a great hire. New Mexico State's going to, 2 years later, Mexico State's going to win 10 games and go to the Mexico Bowl. No, I did not think that. But looking back on it, obviously it was just, we're talking about how great a hire Bronco Mendenhall is. You can't do any better than Jerry Kill has done at a place like New Mexico State in 2 years. It just doesn't happen, and yet it did. So give him and Mario Mocha all the credit in the world. What a story.
Yeah, and, that was the conversation I remember having about UNM in particular too. I mean, just everybody kind of had the idea of like you don't need to hire Jerry Kill away, but you need to find your own version of Jerry Kill. And it's just kind of impossible in some ways, and yet they somehow sort of did that with Bronco Mendenhall. But in terms of Fresno State, they will be without head coach Jeff Tedford. He's battling a health issue of his own right now, and Tim Skipper, a former Western New Mexico football assistant in the early 2000s, he will be leading the team. Just from what you saw of Fresno State, and I don't know how much you watched Fresno State this year. I mean, what kind of stood out to you about them and what they kind of do?
Well, I watched them in an early season game. Was it Purdue? I think maybe. Yes. They beat Purdue impressively, and Mikey Keene was terrific. And as the Purdue coach said, he beat us. And well into the season, like you say, they were nationally ranked. They looked like the best team in the Mountain West, maybe, as you said, the best team in the group of five. And now, I just read a story the other day, had them, I can't remember if it was limping, stumbling, or staggering into this game. And it happens. We've seen it happen many times, and some injuries play a role. And sometimes you just don't know. It's a lack of confidence that comes with a loss. Who knows? But they're just certainly not the team they were in October or even into November. And yet, just record-wise, I don't know that the Mexico Bowl has ever had two teams totaling 18 wins. There was a stretch of time where they had Mexico Bowl had at least one 6-win team, if not two. And I remember coming up with what I thought was a clever name for the game. It wasn't 6-win bowl; it was better than that. But I've been racking my brain and I can't come up with it. But 18 wins from that standpoint is probably as good as it gets for the New Mexico Bowl. And maybe Fresno has had a chance to regroup, and maybe we'll get a really good game. And this game has been so fortunate competitively and meteorologically too. But maybe they'll get another one of those classics like Arizona, Nevada, or Colorado State, Washington State. Who knows? They've had a bunch of those, and the weather. I'm glad this isn't game day. Everybody should be, but yesterday either. But the forecast for Saturday is about 50 degrees, partly cloudy. Should be nice, and full speed ahead.
And I think that's the interesting point that you made too. It was. You couldn't fault Fresno State for what happened. Well, you could fault them, but I wasn't shocked when San Jose State, just absolutely kind of blew them out of the water. I thought San Jose State was playing the best football to anybody in the second half of the season. They were 1-5, and they came to Albuquerque and they just turned the corner on UNM in that second half and really never looked back. Just ran the table. Yeah. Super, super impressive. It was tough for me. In terms of voting for Mountain West Coach of the Year, Odom was the obvious choice, but I thought Brennan was really deserved a good hard look because he turned it around quick.
He's done a great job there. He really has.
And and then obviously, like we talked about, UNM. I think the line closed at 22 points. They were 22-point underdogs at Fresno, and I was there, and it just felt like there was no energy from Fresno State, the team, and they were without Mikey Keene for large chunks of the game, but. Then he came back in, but by that point, UNM was just kind of having their way. But I am curious to see, how they regroup from just this kind of dismal losing stretch that really marred the end of the season for them. But with that in mind, NMSU's coming off loss in the conference championship game. Fresno State's coming off 3 straight losses, I believe. Who do you like in this game?
I like New Mexico State, just based on what's happened to Fresno State. Toward the end of the season, I don't think the loss to Liberty in the CUSA title game changes the picture at all for them. Pavia got hurt in that game and came out. It appears he's ready to go for Saturday, and so I like the Aggies to win this.
I like the Aggies too, and I would be willing to. I think it's a 3.5 right now. I'd be willing to take the points there as well. I was there for one of Fresno State's worst games of the season, so I'm probably a little bit jaded. That's the only time I've seen them up close. But, I think NMSU should be able to run the football on them successfully, and when they can run the football, they're going to usually win that game. With that in mind, that's all we have today. I'm Sean Reider at the Albuquerque Journal. You can find my work at @LenawayRider on x.com. Rick?
I am rwright at abqjournal.com, and you can find my periodic contributions. I'm a retired part-timer this year, actually since 2018, but I'm still out there. If you're into combat sports, I'm your guy. Keep reading.
Thanks for tuning in, and Rick, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it.